After a short break, I hope you got your coffee, tea, and whatever you need to keep you going. Uh, let's move on. We are going to talk about how to build communities. And we have two Hungarians to make an intro to this subject, Nandor and Balint. So guys, you need two mics. You get two mics.
Excellent. Alright guys, so let's get right into this. I'd like to keep this short and sweet so we can have a little time to have a round table about building communities. So yeah, think on questions. So the title is Floating Islands and Parallel Worlds, Building Community and Audience for LARP in Hungary. We have a little experience in this. We started an organization called PoRtaL Worlds 2 years ago. So that's basically the well, one part of the title, and the other one will probably become clear later on. So, my name is Nandor. What's my story in LARP? I used to be a player and an organizer for Vampire LARP back in my little town in Pécs. It's a small town in Hungary. We organized the chapters down there back in the early 2000s. Then around 2006, I had a couple of experiences with Buffer, and I pretty much kind of grew out of the hobby, or so I thought. There was a long, about 10-year hiatus in my LARP career, so to speak, until I found the international LARP community, and that's me, my natural habitat in a Polish castle. Yeah, so I found the international LARP community, and I looked around again in Hungary whether I can have those kind of play experiences in Hungary, and it became clear that, well, not really. So this is the reason why I started to organize Nordic-inspired chamber LARPs in Budapest. So that's my end.
Yeah, and I also started with the Vampire Lives. I never organized, but I was a player when I was around 17, and then also had a small experience, like short experiences with Buffer, and then in my 20s I didn't really play any LARP, but my original interest that was for like storytelling and creating characters and stories, I kind of like professionalized it, and I studied filmmaking. I became a director, and then during my master's studies, I was more like researching into improv and improv-based character and story creation, and that's how I found my way back to LARP, but more to the Nordic LARP kind of niche, and this is how I kind of came back to this interest in LARP.
So what we're going to be talking about, we're going to give you a short overview about the Hungarian LARP scene. We're not going to be going in very deep, but just to give you an impression about the scene. Then we're going to talk about how do we try to build community around chamber LARPs, and some of the techniques, some of the things that we use to reach new audiences, how to get people to play LARPs who have never played LARPs before. So that's kind of the goal of this. And after this, we're going to open it up for questions, for like a kind of a round table.
Yeah, we don't really want. Well, I mean, we can make a Q&A, but of course, what we would like more is to have also that you could also share your experiences with building communities.
So ancient history.
Yeah, that's my part, because I also, since last year, I'm also involved organizing in one of these kind of like ring camps, and this has a long tradition in Hungary. It started in the 38. Well, basically based on the Montessori pedagogy, these were like summer camps with kind of like with the theme that like created some kind of frame for these camps, and these became kind of like every camp. These camps were like fantasy kingdoms, and later on in the 80s, these well, back then it was just this kind of like bunk summer camps, because this was well, it's a small town or village where it started, these camps. And then later on they spread, and in the 80s they got this high fantasy theme added, because in 81, that was the year when the Hungarian translation of Lord of the Rings was released, or was published. So, and until today there are many spin-offs. There were also in the 60s, I'm not completely sure how it's related, but there's some kind of relation for sure. That were these Indian camps where the participants played that they are Indians, like Native Americans. And one of the like famous songwriter was a very active part of these kind of summer camps. And what is really interesting about this, that if you think about it, that all the pioneer movement, also the I always forget this. What is Scouts? The Scouts. There is something kind of similar idea, like in these camps, like what was there originally. But both pioneers and the Scouts, they were like taken over with some kind of ideology, political ideology, and this like bunk like style camps, they always stayed underground, and somehow they represented counterculture, so they never really made it to the mainstream. So like in '38, actually these summer camps started out for kids with Jewish backgrounds who couldn't join the Scouts. And so it was kind of like an opposition to the fascist regime, and later on also like stayed kind of an opposition against the communist regime. And I think in a way it continues this tradition.
Yeah, so what's fascinating about this for me is that these camps have been around for a long time, and they have multiple spin-offs that create an excellent, background, excellent kind of backdrop for people to be turned into larpers. So in a way, it's kind of a similarity between the Israeli Hugim culture. So this is basically the backdrop that some of the things that we could use to turn people into actual larpers. This is basically, and also this is way before the emergence of tabletop role playing in Hungary. So that's going to be the next bit. So let's talk just a few
floating islands.
So what is this metaphor for you?
Yeah, my metaphor is like we were talking about this before we created this the slides, and for me it really recalled this image of the delta of the Danube, where these islands are floating, and only the local fishermen or these locals who can navigate along these islands. Like everyone else who goes there, and you cannot have really a map of that area. You will get lost.
So yeah, and also floating islands is a dessert, right? So so that's my metaphor of the Hungarian LARP community. That the floating islands, the islands that sometimes coalesce and sometimes scatter. So it's a very scattered community, and I don't presume to know everything about it. It's while preparing this talk, we found some new groups that do something similar. So it's kind of an interesting. Maybe it's a Hungarian national feature that we have these. We have a lot of fragmentation in all kinds of activities that we do. So this does not exclude LARP. So the current floating islands of Hungarian LARP, we identified the 5 major islands. We have a buffer fantasy islands that started with the change of the regimes after the fall of the Berlin Wall, after '89, after the tabletop role playing kind of started in Hungary. Another island is of course everything that is organized around World of Darkness. So Vampire. Chamber LARP is kind of a small island, and it's kind of a recently emerging island. And it's I'm happy to say that it's not just the 3 of us doing PoRtaL Worlds who are actually organizing Chamber LARPs. There are others in Hungary. Airsoft-based LARPs. There is a significant amount of LARPification that's happening in the airsoft scene in the past decades in Hungary. So that's definitely a group. Again, this is another group that I don't know much about, but I thought it's good to mention. And of course,
And of course, there are these camps, well, kind of children's LARPs, and this camp has, like, these camps have several spin-offs and several new realms in these, like, known realms.
So yeah, just to point out, there is a Hungarian LARP community, Facebook group that has over 900 people. So again, this is not a big number if you compare it to other countries with similar populations. So Hungary has about with a population of about 10 million. It's still very much it's very much a subculture, I would just say. So that's the So let's talk a little bit about the background of Buffer.
Yeah, I'll talk about this. So basically, that was the first kind of LARP that emerged from, and the idea was just like, okay, we stand up from the table and we act it out, but still with some kind of like character sheet and counting the HP and how, I don't know, how powerful my sword is. Anyway, originally, I think partially it started from these siege games, like war games, which is funny that we call it siege games and not like war games. I mean, the Hungarian term, we talked about it, it's like...
Yeah, my theory on this is that we were not really successful in battles and in wars in Hungarian history, but we had all of the big events that we actually won in Hungarian history were sieges. So this is why, even though there was no actual fortress, there were usually symbolic fortresses in remote locations in the woods that these guys that we fought for. We still called them siege games because we like sieges better.
Yeah. You mean
well, historically defending. Defense was the idea, but of course the game had two groups. A defending and an attacking group.
Yeah. So anyway, these games are usually like in some remote locations in the woods, low budget, still very rules heavy games, especially for the mechanics of fighting and magic. Is like there's still usually some kind of like counting the points. Well, it can, 30 to 300 participants. I don't know actually if there was ever such big event, like 300, maybe more like 100, 200 participants. The largest game to date is Kalium in 2006. Oh, maybe you know something about that?
I was there.
Okay.
So that's still, I'm not exactly familiar with the actual numbers. It's more than 300, and that's up to date the largest game that we ever had. It came out of one of the few instances when multiple organizer groups cooperated in getting a big event together.
And the most recent one that's also Consensus Lab Studio, that's also kind of a cooperation of several groups, and last year they produced the Forgotten Realms LARP, and it had more than 50 players, and I wasn't there, but actually on the photos looked really cool. I mean, what I mean with that they managed to kind of inspire a design that all the players kind of followed the official design of Forgotten Realms, so there was some like really typical colors present in the costumes. I think that's definitely some kind of step forward from what we had before.
And also, these are open games. The next big chapter, Word of Darkness, it's still around in Budapest, so we still have a Budapest by Night. That's a group of people organizing vampire LARPs and also changeling LARPs, so that's definitely going on. But these are invitational games, usually for kind of an inner circle of friends. So that's pretty much the... and yeah. They also have the Budapest by Night organizers were the first ones to open up for the international community, to make attempts at big international games. In 2017, they had a really big international game, well, big in Hungarian terms, in a castle. You were there. You were there. Yeah, yeah, Carpathian Conclave. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So this is still a very important milestone for the Hungarian community, I would say. So this is still a very much talked about event.
Yes, and also for regional, not only Hungarian but regional vampire community.
Right. Right. So.
And just to add, like I think this kind of international opening was also already present at the very kind of like the beginning, or I remember being like participating in games in like 2004, 3, 4 when there were some players coming from Vienna, coming from Germany. So I think this community already had from the beginning on kind of more open international way of organizing, which is on the on one hand, but on the other hand, this kind of like invitation only was narrowing down the accessibility of for local players.
Yeah, same thing about campaigns. So campaigns are great for if you have the capacity, if you have the time to actually get involved. But it's the campaign format is less accessible than the one-off format. That's just and this is why we decided when we were starting to organize games to only do one-offs. So a few of the other islands that we have, of course, we briefly mentioned Airsoft, that has been well, LARPifying in the past decades. They have a really large player base. They have bigger games currently than the buffer scene. But some of them are still more war games. So the motivation here is still more about the tactical combat and less character motivation. So that's the one in generic terms. There are lots of different themes that are emerging. They have post-apocalyptic or modern warfare, or sometimes zombie themes. So yeah, that's some of the.
Still, most of the players have guns.
Yeah. So that's the. So when we were researching this, that's when we found a couple of so far unknown islands on Facebook that are we actually have an Airsoft LARP Hungary group that I had no idea about. So that could be it could maybe a good avenue for connections to build more connections later on. So let's look at chamber LARPs. So far, right now, there are two groups in Hungary organizing chamber LARPs, and the inspiration, the Nordic inspiration, came through from the Czech Republic. We had a couple of organizers going to the LARP weekend that was organized by the Moravian crew, Court of Moravia. So that's basically how this kind of seeped into Hungary.
And now they also organize these, very similar events like LARP weekends every second year, or maybe now they start organizing every year, hopefully.
Yeah, so and the other group is basically us. So yeah, and the idea here is that we want to do multiple genres, just kind of showcase that it's possible to have LARPs in scenes or in genres that are not fantasy or science fiction. Also, I think these are two groups that really take workshops and debriefs seriously. So to have an actual, even though we have shorter games than Buffer or the others, we'd like to have. We're serious about having workshops and debriefs on our games. Let's move. So basically, just a few characteristics of the Hungarian LARP scene. So it's a very scattered, very fragmented scene. Independent parallel groups that kind of coexist. Sometimes don't even know about each other.
These sometimes hate each other.
Sometimes, sure. These are centered around organizers. there's no strong organizational framework. And what I mean by that is that there's no institutions, there are maybe 2 NGOs behind this, and no companies whatsoever.
But it's also like comes from that fact that like having an NGO in Hungary doesn't really mean any kind of accessible, funding. I mean, you can try, but it's not really likely that you would get funding.
Well, this is something that was never been tried. It has never been tried. So again, no public funding, sure, but I don't think there has been many attempts on actually securing public funding. So this is and there are some exceptions. So there are some groups that have ties to local municipalities that do provide them some kind of funding. So that's just basically the general overview. Let's look at a few things on how do we build community around chamber larps. What kind of steps do we try to take to keep our audience? So community building is, I think, the way I interpret this is how do we keep keep our players playing? How do we keep the audience? So, of course, number 1 would be to organize quality games frequently. So organize possibilities. Of course, games itself, LARPs itself, give it's kind of a feature of this game that it creates community. So that's number 1. But I don't think that's enough. So this is why we started to organize LARP meetups, which are essentially events like this on a regular basis. And it's a series of events that we do. So far, it's been going on every 2 months, which is an open event about knowledge sharing, and it's targeted for LARP organizers and players. So far, so we had more organizers usually showing up at these events than players, but that's definitely has been one of the successes. We also had events that we targeted for organizers, like structured events. Some of you participated in yesterday's LARP Jam that we ran here. So that's one of the things that we try to do. So basically, LARP Jam is kind of a game jam, kind of a collaborative workshop in which we build games. So, and again, the idea here is that we want these organizer groups to meet with each other to start to have a conversation about LARP and maybe cooperate on projects later on.
Yeah, we also organize these story game meetups, and which story games are like story-centered rules light systems for tabletop, and I think it's kind of like a gateway from tabletop to Nordic LARPing, or we try to use it as that.
That's what we try to use to involve the tabletop community to maybe step into LARP, because that's the closest thing that I think there is on the tabletop to a Nordic LARP. Of course, we try to create a sustainable organization. So that's definitely one of the so that we're actually able to create games and these events to energize the local community. So let's zoom in on the LARP meetups. So again, these are co-created events that we do something similar to this convention. So we open it up for. So content is basically based on the submission of the people who participate, and this is kind of the mindset that we want to to kind of promote to this mindset of co-creation. So we don't want to tell the Hungarian organizer groups how to do their LARPs, how to organize their LARPs, but we want them to meet with each other and exchange knowledge.
Yeah. And what we do is just we put up an open call with a theme, so what the next meeting would be about, and we had on like definitely we had the one for organizers.
So yeah, there was one about player skills, and the next one is going to be it's going to be a workshop for organizers.
Yeah, but that was actually the other like chamber Nordic LARP group came to us and they offered that we would like to actually give a workshop, like a full kind of 4 hours workshop on organizing and running LARPs.
So yeah, that's mostly lectures, workshops, roundtable talks. That's basically what's usually about. And of course,
hanging out.
yeah. So how do we grow our audience? What kind of steps do we take to grow our audience?
Well, first of all, it can be kind of a controversial question in Hungary because some LARPers think that, well, we don't really need to grow. We are fine. We have enough people. Why is that? Why would we need to grow? And well, on the other hand, well, we think that for us it's important for the sustainability, also to maybe if we take our hobby seriously, then and maybe like from outside, others like funding bodies would also take us seriously sooner or later, and it would be possible to get some grant for running LARPs.
So yeah, I put up a cooperation with other LARP organizers. The way I started to organize my first LARP in Hungary, so my first chamber LARP in 2017, is that I approached a few organizers that, hey, you're more experienced than me, please help. That was basically the approach. And we still try to involve other groups into to promoting and organizing our games. So that's basically one of the things that we do. Another cooperation came out with another NGO, with an NGO of history teachers called Open History. They organize a pretty big event in the Hungarian National Museum, a game show. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later.
Yeah, and it's also very important that we want to design for entry level and new participants. So basically, like especially what we do for this game show, it is more like kind of, that's one of our events where we want to like also reach new audiences, is that it's like very rules light. Well, of course, all our games are very rules light, but also to have the possibility to enter with the character just for a shorter time, just to accomplish one mission, even without, you know, like having very well-defined characters. It's possible to enter a game, and of course workshopping. That's also, but that we already mentioned that.
And the fourth is that we try to reach out for neighboring communities and fan bases. To create games that have appeal for them, and let's get into a few examples on how we actually go about doing this. So the first thing, last year we had the museum game show, which is it's a massive event for all kinds of gamers. It's directed at so basically it had two audiences. One, there was a conference on gamification for museums. It was kind of a closed event, and after that there was an open event for the general audience of the museum, so they could go in, and they had all kinds of gaming groups, from board gamers, video gamers, tabletop. So anyone basically who was creating games in Budapest was invited to host their games inside the halls of the National Museum. And we also got in. We took over the ancient Roman lapidarium of the museum, which is a pretty nice venue, and we created an urban fantasy game inside the museum, inspired by some of the stones and some of the sarcophagi that were on display in the museum. So yeah, we created three layers of participation. So we invited Roman reenactors to play ancient Roman characters. We had a couple of costumed LARPers. That was one layer of cooperation. Second layer of cooperation was an open. Players could sign up on our event as characters from or modern or the 20th century world. And the third layer was directed at people who just turned up at the conference and that was the entry level kind of cooperation, that they could come in as spirits or ghosts with one mission, and they could decide to either just try and fulfill that mission, or in some cases they ended up staying there for the duration of the game. So there was basically one of us. Well, it was me, who was in charge of briefing in all of these dropping guests to the game. So they had actually an influence on what was happening inside. So these missions influenced the game of the players who were well, playing the longer game. I just put it that way.
Yeah, I just wanted to add about open history that this event is like a museum pedagogy event, that they want to add gamification into museum pedagogy, and that's why they also invite other groups who make games, sometimes not even related to museum or museum pedagogy or historical themes, right?
Yeah, and it's gonna sort of the show is also going to be happening this year. This year we're going to do a different game with a connection to one of the temporary exhibits of the museum. There's an exhibition about fashion in socialism. So we're going to put in a game that takes place in a fashion show during the 70s. And the players are going to play roles that have connections to this fashion house, which was the only fashion house during the 70s, during the communist regime. And they're also going to play members of the communist elite. So that's basically the game. And we try to, of course, create the game around the actual history of the exhibit. So that's going to be
it will
fashion
also
dictatorship.
and it will also have different entry levels. Now we designed with 2 entry levels, so like these well, actually it's like player-generated characters that we just asked certain questions that they answered, the players who applied for the game, and so they came up with their own characters, and we are weaving together these characters, creating the game out of that. And there will be another level just for drop-ins again, with just short kind of like one-liner missions, some props, maybe like minimal costumes. They can go in, be there just for 10 minutes, or if they like it or they find it that's their thing, they can stay also longer.
So let's see, what do we have here? So there were the other kind of archipelagos, the other neighboring communities that we try to involve. And I'm going to zoom in on one. There is a big fan base around Agatha Christie in Hungary. They have an Agatha Christie festival in Hungary, and basically. Parallel to that, we organized one of our biggest games yet in a villa in Budapest, an Agatha Christie murder mystery chamber LARP event for 50 players, and this event to date attracted the largest ratio of new LARPers to our event. And of course, this is because we marketed it as an Agatha Christie murder mystery event. And of course we had a lot of LARPers, but at least 20%, or actually more than 20% of the people who turned up it was their first game.
And I think it was successful in that sense that we actually reached new audience who like now we have applicants for our new game who played LARP there first.
And also, this also opened up a couple of other avenues because the event really looked good. It had a trailer. I think this was the first LARP in Hungary that actually came with a trailer, and it was not an Airsoft game. Airsoft LARPs actually have players in Hungary, or trailers in Hungary. So this is the... and again, it attracted some attention on the corporate level as well. We actually received requests for team buildings after this, even though we did not have an offer out that we do team building. So, but now we do. Yeah, another kind of emerging cooperation is taking place with the Steampunk Bar of Budapest, cracking town. We organized a few games there, and this is a bar that actually comes with they created their own story. They've wrote a novel about the story, about the universe that the bar is set in. And right now we're talking about how can we cooperate around, how can we tell their story within our games. This is what we
So
thought.
let's open it up.
What you guys are doing to build and grow your community in your respective countries?
Yes, so you covered, I think, uh, lots of directions, but just to put, an underline, it's very important to catch them when they are young, to yes, to our children, and sometimes it's delayed because we have like this. Um, People doing fun stuff and hobbies in the teenage years until 18, and then suddenly we all get drafted to the army, and then you don't have time, and you're supposed to be an adult, and then you're going out, and you need to. And sometimes people like get out of all of their hobbies and adult, but then like I think we see at the forums, at the Facebook groups, every day a message of, I used to doing this very cool stuff when I was teenager. Is it still a thing? How can I join? You put the seeds of escapism in their brains, and they are coming back. And the second, never be shy about what you do, and role play in public, and it would create attention. I remember me and some other guy walking in midday in full armor into a coffee shop and ordering a coffee, and the waitress, she looks like I say, "Aren't you feel weird doing this public?" I said, I don't feel weird. I don't feel weird. Do you? And she was, well, yes, you have a point.
So yeah, there's actually a story that relates to that. At the Museum Game Show last year, we had one major issue, well, one minor issue, that the dressing room was pretty far away from the actual game venue. So the Roman reenactors and the LARPers who were actually in full costume, they had a bit of a hike to the top of the building to get dressed. However, it ended up being quite positive because they had. This way, they actually had to cross the entire venue in full, Roman uniform, full gear, and the camera crews that were present, they of course found out that these guys are here. So we actually got some media coverage out of this minor inconvenience, which was it was pretty helpful.
I would like to offer a counterpoint to catch them when they're young. I think we should catch them when they're in their 30s and finally get money and have had children. Because we think that it's almost the best way of actually growing a Nordic community is to target adults that have always wanted to do something more with their life but hasn't really dared. And do it around, for example, movie screenings and stuff like that. For example, the Downton Abbey movie is a great inroad for people. People come out there and they're in love with this era, and they're just wanting to spend money to get to feel that. And same thing with the new Blade Runner movie came out. There were so many people that said, "Oh, wouldn't it be great to have something like that?" And then you go, "Look at these photos. Doesn't that look very much like Blade Runner? Yeah, this is reality in our city. Give us your money." So yeah, catch them when they're in their 30s and have already had children.
Yes, because then they will bring Hello. Children along. You said at the game museum show you had spirit missions. Can you give an example of that and tell us how it affects the game design overall?
Sure. So we came up with a world which was based on the universe of Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere. So there was that's London below. So we created the Budapest below, and that was basically the world for the LARPers and the reenactors. Then we had a second layer for players who played people from our worlds, and basically the game was about the meeting of these two worlds. because one of the worlds had a problem. The spirit realm opened up into to Budapest below, and this problem manifested itself with, well, spirits, ghosts arriving on the game venue. This basically how we got the drop-in players, and how this so what kind of missions were there. They had to find out. They basically had to communicate with with members of of Budapest below. But we instructed the players of Budapest below that they are afraid of the ghosts. They need the modern players to mediate for them. So this is pretty much these are some of the missions. And some of these spirits were historical figures or inspired by historical figures, and well, missions were. So the idea was that they were actually deceased who could not rest and basically solve the mission that was left unfinished in their lives. So that was basically the general idea behind this. I hope that answers it.
I already have one. So, in terms of growing and building a community, there is actually in every country, I think, a community that is much larger than LARPers and mostly has the same interests. Tabletop RPG guys. And I don't know how we can reach them. Maybe there are ways, but yeah.
No, it's really funny because when we were putting together these slides and we were at that point like which other neighboring communities we have, and at one point we realized we forgot about the tabletop because it's so obvious. We think it's obvious, but it's not obvious, of course. But I think what we try to do is the story game meetups. As we said, we kind of regard story game as a gateway to Nordic LARP from tabletop, because you leave behind this rule heavy, systems that involve a lot of math, and you move towards more of a kind of a narrative and language-based storytelling.
We have few traditions of combining, because our two communities of tabletop and LARP are very not totally the same, but 60% the same. We have a few tradition of combinations. One of them is during some tabletop campaigns we make a LARP session. The players getting into a political hub, they continue to play their own characters, then I write some all the other characters that are present, I invite few other friends, and we just LARP the whole session. It can be with 25 people now. They're in a council and they have to, and so on. And the other one is pretty similar, but it's a format we call PubCon because it's set in a pub usually, and it's basically we having about 15 GMs. Each of them is, for example, we had a Venice PubCon or a Shadowrun. So we have a setting, we're choosing a setting. Each GM is making 2 short adventures of 1.5 hours or 1 hour, and there are 2. And basically, there is this LARP of people going on making schemes, political stuff. The GMs are the job givers, the Mr. Johnsons or the nobles, and so on. And they're getting adventurers, and then the bell tolls, and we're sitting on the tables. They're running the adventure. Stuff is changing in the city because of this. And we are going on to the next, and so there are a lot of places for combinations of the two.
Hi. I wanted to point out another possible audience. Maybe this is also linked a little bit to EduLARP, or depends on the approach that each of us is taking. Educators. Because you also touched indirectly with the museum example how LARP as a methodology can be used in various educational settings, especially non-formal education. I think that nowadays the new educators, I'm not talking about teachers that are 60 years old, obviously, but the newer generation is very much interested in alternative methods of pedagogy, and especially, for example, drama pedagogy students, I think would be a very good audience. Even if you just, include them in recreational LARPs, they're still getting familiar with the methodology that maybe they can use, in their own fields.
Yeah. I'm like there is kind of like this participatory theater in education, drama instructors. That's another island, and that's my personal mission also, to get that island involved.
Just to jump in on this real quick, the music medication. So the NGO that organizes the game show Open History, they actually came up with programs that are very much like LARPs. So, but they have never played LARP. They played. Now they did. They played the LARP with us last month. That was their first game. We created basically a game just to show them our methodology, basically, or methods. But yeah, they created a kind of an alternative celebration for the Hungarian Revolution of '56, which is essentially a LARP, but they didn't know it.
Okay, so now I would focus also on what Elektra said. Yes, educators. There are so many NGOs in each of our countries running the summer camps and youth exchanges, and all of them get loads of money for doing boring stuff. And those, young people come and sit and listen to somebody talking for a week, and later they come back and they're happy because it was for free. But there's a lot of money involved, and those people always write about alternative education or non-formal education, and they would be happy to have something actually interesting and live going on.
So yeah, just to get back on that, it just came to my mind that there was actually a university elective course at one of the universities in Budapest that's basically about role playing and culture, and the educator, the person that runs that course, she maintains a good network of contacts in the Hungarian educational system, and she's pushing these boundaries. The framework that she's working with is the storyline method, the Scottish storyline method, which is also very LARP-like. It's not necessarily not necessarily other LARPs, but very close to them. So yeah, there's some inroads that we're making on that as well in the community.
But I also wanted to focus on your question from a perspective of Krakow in Poland, as we have like a little bit different problem, because we have a large community that wants to LARP, even to chamber LARP in the city, and we do not have enough LARPs provided for them. So every once you publish a LARP, the places go out in the first day. So all the people who were, for example, outdoors, didn't check the Facebook, and they're just not in the game. So there is a big demand, and what we introduced to meet that was we started a project this year, which is we are testing a LARP, ready-made LARP from the data, from the LARP base, once per month, a chamber LARP, and we evaluated how much fun is it and what are the possible educational goals behind it. So we do not have to spend the time of designing the LARPs, but we want to test those, and maybe we find 6 out of 12 just replayable LARPs. So they are ready, we know it, and we can run it like every second month, because this is easy for us. We've just printed the stuff and we can go on, and the people will like it because the people will always come. There's a lot of people who want to come, because if just a new one person came to a LARP, later he's talking to his friends. And even if the LARP was boring, then when you tell the story in 5 minutes, it sounds so cool that the five more people come. And maybe we've reached the critical amount that's now spreading like an avalanche. And people want, where are those LARPs? Yeah, where can I play? I want to join, and I want to have these cool photos and stories, and we want to meet the demand.
I'll just share a couple of things we as Terrible Creations did. Of course, we did a whole bunch of conventions sci-fi, fantasy, whatever. Beyond that, we did something we called a LARP day, which was a 1 day or half a day event, during which we will play 3 or 4 chamber LARPs consecutively for free. And for a while, this was a traveling show. Basically, the only major city we didn't do this was Zagreb. We did this in. Yeah, I'm coming to that. This worked out so-so. I mean, we've had some games. The interest was not what we expected, but it worked. We had many people who were first-timers. And also, we used to do the last Friday every month a free game here. But as chamber LARPs or LARPs in general are not really well known in Croatia, it took a long time before it, took off and people started coming in. I'm going to conclude with this remark because we need to give the floor to our next presenter. But before that, thank you, Nandor, thank you, Balint.